Welcome to A Brilliant Idea Every 60 Seconds. And it's been interesting to launch this particular show. My guest is Mark Kozub, and basically a brother in arm, a writer, fellow writer, a fellow creative. We have whined and cried over the same kinds of beers and the same kinds of places as creative, struggling people that we are. Mark Kozub is an author. He's written several books. He's also a professional writer and writing for advertising and marketing communications. He writes strategic communications. And we'll take a look at some of the books. We'll talk about them in an astonishing style, very quirky, weird, man. You've always been weird. But before we get into some of that, because we want to talk about creative processes, and I'm going to pick your brain about how you see that. In fact, tell me about an upcoming workshop that you've got at MacEwan University.
It's called Creativity in the Corporate World. And basically, in a nutshell, I think, you know, this is actually the second class that I'm going to be teaching.
They let you come back?
Yeah, they let me come back. It's amazing.
So nobody bleeding at the end of the first one?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The first one was really intensive because the thing I really found, the drawing card for a lot of people, was when I went around the class and said, you know, what are your learning goals out of this? A lot of them really felt that their jobs were so stifling that they felt so brutally negative about the corporate world, actually. And it was actually even kind of depressing. By the
How
end
unusual.
Of the first class.
I know. About the corporate world. When that happened. Now, when is the workshop taking place? Let's get that out there right away. Yeah.
It's starting next Saturday, so it'll be May 28th, and happens for 3 Saturdays in a row.
It's a whole day?
Whole day, from actually 10 till 4. Very intensive, but when I say intensive, I mean super fun as well, because there's a lot of it really hinges on brainstorming, getting people to break down a lot of the barriers that they do have in the corporate world.
Right.
And I found last time some of the exercises I put people through, they were going, why do we have to do this? It's like, you know, it's going to be really fun. Just trust the process. Trust that we're going to listen to ambient music right now and draw for half an hour. And to begin with, it was like, oh, why? This is so dumb. I'm not 8 years old. After they did it, after they did the drawing and then returned to writing, it was like a whole world opened up to them. And I actually saw smiles in their faces that weren't there, like I said, when they first came with that heavy weight of the corporate world on them. It was really amazing to watch.
Well, when I saw you, and I mean, I would have had you on one of my shows at some point, because ultimately I love talking to creative people, but the idea of a brilliant idea every 60 seconds is based on a process that I've developed in terms of creativity I'm beginning to share with others. Because like you, that's what I see, and not just in the corporate world, but how many times, you know, if you could have a quarter for every time someone has said to you, I don't have a creative bone in my body, or I just can't think creatively anymore, or I feel really stifled at work. And so the idea is to, in terms of a brilliant idea, to rediscover the nature of your creativity, and then work with what I call inherent value. But maybe to get a better sense, I mean, let's talk about creative process, because again, our show focuses on how different people will work differently. At the heart of because you're a writer, you're a musician, you're an artist. I don't know if there's any particular order in terms of
writer would be first. Writer's
first,
always been first.
You're a bass player, right?
A bass player.
Yeah, bass player. I might play keyboard.
Okay.
Should have told you to bring your bass. We could have
jammed.
a little jam.
That's
We could have a brilliant idea. I see. We should at the end. We have to have a brilliant idea. So. For those of you connecting online, we're looking for a question if you need an idea, because towards the end of the show, we have to come up with a brilliant idea in 60 seconds.
Wow.
All right?
Okay, amazing.
What is at the heart of your creative process?
Mine? Wow,
Yeah.
at the heart of it.
I'm going to let you off easy.
I think in a way, when I think of the more truly creative work I do, even just for me, or, you know, writing prose or poetry, it's, I think, wanting to communicate something and then deciding, what is it that I do want to communicate? What are the things that I really, really care about in this world? And honestly, if I can't really connect with that, then creativity seems kind of pointless, actually.
And that makes sense. So in a sense, you look for the sort of the relationship or the connection that you have with that idea, and you identify it. And once you have that, then your first book, The Browns.
The Brown Family.
Yeah, The Brown Family. I mean, what a hilarious story, but it's biographical, autobiographical.
It's pretty autobiographical, very much, actually. I mean, for me, I wrote it because, my mother had been diagnosed with a pretty virulent cancer. And I was watching the changes she was going through, and I mean, realizing too that she wouldn't be probably on this earth for that long. And it's pretty hard to find a sense of joy during a time like that.
Yeah.
And I found for me, it was looking through a lot of photo albums of this, growing up in the tacky, you know, late 60s, 70s, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I actually just wanted to find the joy in life, period. And then beyond that, some of the changes my mother was going through in terms of, suddenly becoming way more spiritual than she ever had before, which is why the character, Mrs. Brown, believes an angel comes to her.
Right.
And suddenly, Mrs. Brown is doing, you know, who is this conservative woman, suddenly is doing all these sorts of crazy things out of the blue. No, throw out all that old-fashioned, we need to wear bright colors, we need to whatever, all that kind of stuff, right? And my mom actually did go through some of that kind of stuff. And so, like I said, I wanted to find actually the fun in facing some of those turbulent kind of phases in life and whatnot, and just kind of relive some fun of childhood.
You bring up the cover of the book, Evan, and he's talking about the Brown family specifically. It's I was there for the launch. I think I was there for the launch of it. Yeah. Loved it. Absolutely a wonderful story. Make a great film.
Oh,
should be turning that into a screenplay. There's a challenge for writing as a screenplay.
Would be.
Now we got a couple of video clips that we're going to play on the show. Now you've picked video poems for us.
Right.
Okay, tell me something about that. Yeah.
Well, I, for many years, had been involved with, and I was a founding member of the Raving Poets in Edmonton, where basically the whole idea of it was to go back to that beat poetry kind of thing with doing live improvisational music in the background, a series of musicians. And then we would like a band without a lead singer, because the lead singer would be poets that we would invite up from the crowd.
Right.
And just do improv music behind them. And the more I was doing this, and the more I was getting up and doing poetry as well, which I found a really freeing way of, you know, using words that has nothing to do with prose, right?
Right.
I just started thinking, okay, how do I take that poetry thing to the next level? So I started drawing pictures as well, and fleshing out some of the poems that way. And then a friend of mine from the band who was really into making, you know, video poem, documents, put together these two different videos, and it was just such fun working on and taking something from printed page to a totally different level of, having music in the background, voice recording, all that kind of stuff.
Well, let's take a look at one of them right now. This is what Mark Kozub means when he says video poem.
When I was married, I was 12.5 feet tall because I felt someone loved me. Now that I'm a bachelor again, I don't wash the dishes. I just leave them out in the rain or let neighbors' dogs lick them clean. And like most bachelors, I have one pair of clothes. I eat sardines and Mars bars for breakfast, and I don't read the expiry dates on anything. And some nights I fall asleep on the three-legged couch with a half-finished bottle of absinthe on the floor and half-chewed piggy puffs strewn around my three-quarters naked body with Barbarella on TV. And some nights I go out with some member of the opposite sex and imagine what it would be like to be married again. And they groan about what it's like to be married now. And I say, be happy. And then I walk to my car and look at the empty passenger seat. And I know that someday, someone new will be sitting there. And I think that makes me sad, true. But weirdly, I'm happy too. I'm happy for the times to come and those I got to have with you.
You know, I think I want to meet a woman with a question mark for a head. I think
the whole reason for the video poem was just to create that.
I think I can identify with that. Believe you me, I think I think that's what we got to do. Find a woman just as a question because that kind of says it all right there. And every woman watching now is going to be going, all right, hate mail, hate mail, hate mail, hate mail. It's
Well, interestingly, I do think actually women probably think men have question marks for heads, and men think women have question marks for heads. And I mean, really, that to me is interesting fodder for anything creative. If you think about, men and women, the unique dynamic there within, and all that stuff. That's endless fodder.
And when you think about it, I think that, and one of the missions that I have too is to trying to help people connect with creativity in such a way that it can improve also relationships, professional relationships, personal relationships. Because I think one of the things I see that gets lost very quickly, and this is what your workshop really speaks to, you look at people in the corporate world, you go in with lots of energy, lots of optimism, lots of purpose, and then suddenly it goes away. Same thing in relationships where there's lots of creativity, lots of optimism, and it goes away. We lose our connection to creative process and our shared creativity.
And a big part of it is playing. I think that's a really, really key thing. And actually, that's one thing that I find, like with the workshop, the Creativity in the Corporate World workshop, the big part of it is to get people into that thing of let's brainstorm, let's really just go crazy, and let's not say an idea is not workable or whatever.
No such thing as a stupid idea.
Exactly.
Right?
I give them ideas that actually, number one, couldn't even really work in the real world anyway. So it's like, you know what? Let's just have fun with it. Let's be like kids playing, and that can be like so much fun. And I agree. I mean, in a relationship sense, I think that can also exist too. I mean, it's very easy to get bogged down by the day-to-day of life and the maintenance and all that stuff. But the realization is, I mean, I can truly say about my, significant other at the moment that, I mean, I love being with her, and it's like, wow, we should remember to have fun more often because laughing is so much fun. She happens to be very creative as well, and she'll be on the show in the future.
Well, yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
my little plug for her. So yeah.
We're speaking with Mark Kozub, who's a writer, musician, artist, who's published various books, does a lot of writing, a very respected individual in the artistic community in Edmonton. You can go to his website, markkozub.com, that would be Kozub, and find out much more about him. As a matter of fact, we have it up here, and we've got your about, which is all your story. And, of course, if you want to learn about the books and where to get them, and they're all on this page here, the books by Mark Kozub, and we'll talk a little bit more about them. But before we do, what I would like to talk about is one of the exercises, to give an example of what you're doing in the workshop that's coming up on May
28th.
May 28th for 3 consecutive Saturdays at MacEwan University. It'll be on Saturdays from 8 until 4.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry, 8 till 4? No, from 10 till 4.
10 till 4.
Sorry about that.
Or you can show up early and just hang out.
Exactly.
And, get your,
totally. Have a donut.
Recover from your Friday night hangover and then go in. Share one of the exercises that you're using to accomplish this sort of raising the creative bells for people who've lost it in the corporate world.
Okay, well, one of them actually that I really lead people through, I call it Who Cares? And that is that they are supposed to write for about half an hour and not block themselves, write about everything they care about. It can be a sentence, it could be one word, it can be whatever, and make the list as long as it can possibly be. From there, of course, there's a fair amount of discussion. Then we go from there talking about the things in the corporate world, the sort of words they use, the jargon, the whatever, and we do a comparative of like, look at all these things that you really care about. Mm-hmm. Look at these corporate jargony words. Is there a disconnect here? And in doing that, I really found that there were light bulbs going on of like, wow, so I spend my time writing things, or, because most of them, of course, that take the class would be writers, that I don't believe in at all.
Yeah. So you mean instead of using words like "let's interface"?
Yes, or implement.
Yeah, let's implement.
A good one.
Yeah.
Facilitate.
Yeah, let's decreate. That's going to be I'm still writing the book. I'm going to have a chapter called Decreation.
Okay.
That's how we decreate things.
Okay.
Things like, okay, we're having a group meeting now. Let's come up with some good ideas. On the other hand, what would you do? Come up with bad ideas?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about immediate decreation. is when the person heading the meeting says that is the first thing out of the gate. Let's come up with some good ideas.
It's so
They just
true.
decreate it, right?
I think that blocks people so much. The one thing I found through doing some of the writing exercises, another is like journaling, for instance, about your highs and lows of the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And just because you need some sort of signpost for okay, what were the big moments, and so it elicits an emotional response. I found in doing that, sometimes people go, oh, I don't know what my first sentence should be. Sometimes people get so blocked on that first sentence thinking it's got to be a good one. It's like, no, it doesn't, which is why journaling can be really good, because journaling, you just kind of go. And sometimes it's not till 12 sentences down the line that they realize, oh, this is actually starting to turn into something now.
Well, in the exercise you mentioned, you talk about, I mean, you open them up, it's not just about sentences, it can be words, turns of phrase.
Totally.
And so language, it's interesting that, I love that idea of taking the language that you encounter in your workspace and then the language that you use to describe your own life and what you care about. And that must be quite a revelation for many people when they look at that.
I found that it was. I really found that it was. And what I found was, originally when we started brainstorming, we had a whole, the board full of the implement and facilitate and all the jargon words. To begin with, there was groans of almost depression, like, oh, this is my life. I hate this. Why am I doing this on a Saturday? But then, once we really got going on it, there were laughs, and people were starting to have fun. And again, that disconnect was so great because people realized, wow, the essence of trying to communicate to any target audience is you want to really get through to them. And if you're using words that are part of your corporate lingo that you feel, top down might want those words in there, but the person who's receiving that message doesn't want them. Right. They want humanity. Don't we all want it?
Yeah.
And that's good, clear communication. And so, I think there's a whole bunch of ways that exercise could even grow from there, for that matter.
Well, absolutely. And comparison is a really interesting way of releasing a lot of creative thinking. For example, exercises like, let's say if it's business oriented, you make a list of everything you should do to fail.
Okay, yeah.
And people could probably, any business person, I challenge anyone out there saying, how do we improve our business? Go out and write down everything you need to do to completely and utterly fail. And then you'll have your answer, because if you turn that over, you now have your business plan.
I like that. That reminds me of, I was watching Seinfeld last night, and it was the episode where George decides he's going to do the opposite of everything he's ever done.
Right.
And suddenly he was successful. And I thought the reason why that show, to me, was brilliant is we can all be Costanza in moments, and I watched it thinking, damn it, what am I going to do tomorrow?
What? Everybody can be a Costanza. What are you saying, Mark? Look, what do you want me to do here? We got cameras. What am I supposed to do?
It's like Woody Allen on steroids, isn't it? It's amazing.
Gotcha. Speaking with Mark Kozub, a good friend of mine and a wonderful artist, and we're gonna visit another video poem, another great piece of work. It's very hypnotic, I find. So I'm looking forward to watching this one again too. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of your other books as well.
Definitely.
Okay, another video poem from Mark Kozub.
When I was a kid, I used to spend hours pretending I was a naked woman being slowly roasted in an oven. But then again, didn't everyone? When I was a kid, I never had a crush on Jimmy from HR Puffin Stuff. I never wanted to be his magic flute. Instead, I ran from one end of the house to the other, breathing hard, face red with erotic anticipation every time I heard the Wonder Bra jingle. And like most kids, I'd strip down, put on a pair of Mom's best panties, and lick whipped cream off my ass. I know what you're thinking. When I was a kid, it must have been pretty damn obvious. All of my aunts and uncles must have sat around shaking their heads in silence until that one drunken uncle, brave from drinking aftershave, finally put it all into words. You know that kid you just watch. That kid's gonna end up being
You're whacked out, man. You're just completely. No, actually, that's hilarious. I mean, it's such a simple form, eh? But you know what I love about it is that, if anything, this really, for me, resurrects poetry.
Oh, okay.
I used to write poetry at one point. I think a lot of people can.
Right.
And do you find that are people more connected, less connected? Is poetry kind of just out there, and there's a few people that?
I think that there's more people into it than you think, and I think some of it can be very accessible. The thing is, some of it can be wildly esoteric too. I mean, I've sat at poetry readings going, I don't know what that was. And sometimes it's like, I don't know what that was, and that really wowed me. It's incredible. Sometimes it's, I really don't know what that was. It's like,
on the other hand,
wow.
I've never tried it. I've only done a reading of a play at one point that I wrote when I was a young man. It's the only time I've done live reading. I've never attempted to do poetry live, but I mean, this format, in a lot of ways, when you think of the person on the chair, I mean, it really, but the image, the connection of the images, like the selection that you make, is so simplistic, but it just speaks volumes. It's very funny too.
Well, it was obviously aiming at humor, and it is very twisted, almost, embarrassingly so.
Surprisingly so.
I know.
Mark Kozub.
Exactly. And interestingly, the whole area that the whole thing began on was the Wonder Bra thing for me.
Yeah.
It was this remembrance of my childhood that I literally would run from one end of the house when the Wonder Bra jingle was on. And somehow, I don't know why, just the whole video poem turned into something. So I decided to take something and take it way overboard, obviously.
Okay, give me a slow walking bass line. When I thought about fruit of the loom, I knew I had found the doom, and that it wouldn't be too soon till everyone would look at me as being a Looney Tune. Thank you. That'll be on my next DVD and CD and thumbnail drive coming out in a bookstore that's crazy enough to take it on. Let's switch some gears here, and let's maybe call up the laptop for me, Evan. Let's talk about your books. I mean, they're listed here in this particular order. We've talked about the Uptown. Well, there's the Brown family, and then the Uptown Browns.
Right, which was the sequel.
The sequel to that. And I really heartily encourage you to get the books and read them. They are a phenomenal style, and it's an easy read. It's not the 630-page epic.
Right,
it's nice and tight, and it's really, really good. Tell me about Celebrating Success in Edmonton.
That one was simply, I mean, I guess, certainly my more professional life and whatnot. I've been a magazine writer for many years, and I love interviewing people. It's one of my all-time favorite things. And when the recession first hit, which hopefully now I think towards the true edge of waning, and all that.
I can only hope.
Yeah. I was feeling like people needed maybe some degree of inspiration, and so did a limited run book of a bunch of series of interviews with influential Edmontonians. It was called Celebrating Success in Edmonton. People like Jim Hole, Gene Perry of Companies Coming.
Yep.
People who
Bob
really...
Baker, Barbara Poole. I actually did tributes for Barbara Poole. And
who was a really amazing lady.
An amazing person.
And Kevin Lowe, too, by the way.
Kevin
and I thought
Lowe,
Kevin Lowe was really fascinating to interview. I didn't realize some of what he went through to try to overcome some of his odds. Towards the end, he had a horrible inner ear problem, and he was just having constant, horrible vertigo for his entire last series. And it was just season, sorry about that. And shows you how much I know about hockey, eh?
Yeah, there you
go. But anyway, it was really, really fascinating. I would walk out of these interviews constantly inspired, thinking, overcoming odds seemed to be the big recurrent theme of all the interviews.
It's a great title. Celebrating Success in Edmonton is really proactive. Here's one, a Calgary album, Glimpses of the Way We Were.
And that simply is a coffee table book about Calgary, how it began up until about the 1940s. The fun of that book was actually looking through tons of old pictures through the Glenbow Museum archives. Mm-hmm. Man, there's some great black and white photos that really, they say a picture tells, what was it, 10,000 words, 1,000 words,
1,000 words,
blah, blah, blah.
whatever. Yeah.
I mean, they speak volumes.
They do. There's so much photography. I mean, it's endless when you think about it. I know the work that the museum and the archives here, Alberta Archives and so on. I mean, the depth of material that has yet to be even cataloged.
Very, very true.
And is unbelievable. Big Enough Dreams. You're a contributing author to this one.
And that one, I love doing. That was actually one of my favorite things. Again, like I love doing stuff that's sort of, I guess, journalism-based, and interviewing people is one of my great joys. And this book, when the opportunity came out to contribute to it, it was a series of interviews with adults with developmental disabilities. And my guy, Dan, who lives in St. Albert, was just such a fascinating, I mean, you want quirky. This guy was capital Q quirky. And I just loved his sense of, he spent some time in the Michener Center, and there were a lot of allegations of abuse and all that sort of stuff. And he probably had come across some of it. I know when he would speak of it, he would literally shake.
Yeah.
But he had this amazing attitude of saying, well, whatever I went through, at least I learned how to work with wood there, because I had a wood shop there and whatnot. And he found the positive in everything. And I went to an event where he does a lot of, he's part of a bowling league with a bunch of other adults with developmental disabilities.
Yeah.
And they all loved him. And it was because of his attitude, his resilience for life. And I remember I would interview him, and I'd drive, sometimes through snowstorms getting back home going, I'm so glad I've met this guy. And I want to do his story, as much justice as I can. So ended up doing a lot of rewrites on the story, trying to get the proper person.
Well, it is amazing. And I mean, my privilege has been to do tributes for the Chamber of Commerce. Last time I had a chance to do Bill Comrie's story. I look at all the people I've done. It's the same thing. I walk away going, all of the lessons that I've learned too, the inspiration, and that's why I'm a multimillionaire now, because I've obviously learned everything I could possibly learn from them.
Likewise.
Yeah. By the way, you can order any of Mark's books online at markkozub.com. There's little things that says order your copy today, and they are well worth the read. And I want to get back to the video poem shortly now before we close. When you're creating do you create the poem first, or are you playing your bass and doing this?
It's the poem first, for sure.
It is, eh?
Yeah, it is. And then, well, let me think here. There's been times I have created things music-wise first, and then created, a groove over top of that.
Yeah.
But
is it a breaking down process? Because, I mean, you get down to the most simplistic values in the poem. Like, everything is just, it's almost like you couldn't break it down anymore. So do you have is that a process to get to that? Because I can't imagine you sitting down and that's exactly what you write.
Thank you. That's exactly what I do. Actually, my first draft of that poem was 3 or 4 times longer.
Right.
And actually, then I read it somewhere in public, and I realized there were certain things that laid kind of flat, and other things really got, had juice behind them. And then somehow just reading that aloud, and actually that's one of the really big things that I talk about in the creativity in the corporate world class too, is read your work aloud. Does it resonate? Does it feel good? Does that sentence feel really long? If it does, maybe make it shorter, make it punchier. And I find, because of that spoken word, and it's because of having worked in radio, which both you and I have done, radio I find did a great service to my writing that way in terms of brevity. And I mean, I'd like to believe that's what I bring to the books and the poetry and all that sort of stuff, is say it in 100 words or less.
Well, I agree. I sort of attribute radio to my style as well. I've learned a lot, and because we had to edit and you had to get to the point. And that's what I love about your style. And I think for readers who enjoy the quirky, well, it's not just about quirky, it's well done, and it really allows you as a reader to get completely engaged in what the character is about. And yet there are complexities within those relationships, but you have a chance to really sink your teeth into it. And you have an amazing writing style, and it's a real privilege, A, to know you, B, to have you on the show. Mark Kozub, I just want to go back to give one more plug, because I like to support my friends. If you want to learn something about creativity, this is definitely a man to experience creativity with and learn about your own creativity. I encourage you to take Creativity in a Corporate World. It's happening at MacEwan University, May 28th to June 11th, 3 Saturdays. You can register by phoning 780-497-5000. You can also go to his website, markkozub.com. That's spelled K-O-Z-U-B. And I got to tell you, to finish off the show, any last short thoughts about brilliant ideas and generating ideas for anyone out there? Leave us with a Kozubism.
Kozubism?
It could be cubism, but it's a Kozubism. I'm looking for a Kozubism, a Mark Kozubism.
Okay. Well, I think when blocked, go for a walk. Or, and I used to do this in radio all the time. It was amazing. I'd be totally blocked, and I'd be like, I should go use the washroom. I would go use the washroom, I'd come back, and I'd have an idea. And I think the simple fact of
like just go take a dump, or
yeah, exactly, whatever it is.
I need an idea. Excuse me.
You can't force yourself. Well,
No.
But I think just get away from it. Don't be locked into it. Get away from it, and then allow your mind to ease.
Change your environment, if you will.
And just allow yourself to breathe. Maybe breathing is the main thing. That would be my big key word here.
Go to the bathroom and breathe.
And breathe, yeah.
That's a brilliant idea. I think. Now completely.
Well.
No, but this is him. You see, this is him. Breathe, bathroom.
Exactly.
Books. That's how that works with Mark. Mark, I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
Definitely.
And Evan, we got to play that second video poem one last time to celebrate the life and the art of Mr. Mark Kozub.
When I was a kid, I used to spend hours pretending I was a naked woman being slowly roasted in an oven. But then again, didn't everyone? When I was a kid, I never had a crush on Jimmy from HR Puffin Stuff. I never wanted to be his magic flute. Instead, I ran from one end of the house to the other, breathing hard, face red with erotic anticipation every time I heard the Wonder Bra jingle. And like most kids, I'd strip down, put on a pair of Mom's best panties, and lick whipped cream off my ass. I know what you're thinking. When I was a kid, it must have been pretty damn obvious. All of my aunts and uncles must have sat around, shaking their heads in silence, until that one drunken uncle, brave from drinking aftershave, finally put it all into words. You know that kid, you just watch. That kid's gonna